Hello, hello, it's DNN Dave, and I'm here with Don Gingold again. Don, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Dave. How about you?
I'm doing well. We're still in a little bit of a supposed to be in a little bit of a social distancing kind of world right now, but it's loosening up quite a bit down here, so it's almost like, man, these yahoos out here just acting like there's nothing going on out there.
I'll share with you about that. My daughter made me a mask because, of course, it's all about science.
Oh yeah,
So when you
nice.
wear it, you let
Uh,
everybody know that I'm wearing it because science says this is why we need to do it.
that's fantastic. I like that a lot. Well, are you going to wear that through this live stream here?
You're going to hear a real muffled voice if I do, so I think I'll keep it off.
Oh man, well, happy belated Father's Day. I mean, yesterday was Father's Day, right? So I hope
Thank
you had a
you.
good
You
time
too.
with that.
Wonderful. It was great to hear from the kids. One is out in California, and one is just a couple of suburbs away. So I got a chance to see her and talk with him. So that was
That's
great.
awesome. That is great. Yeah, my daughter came over, and I was mentioning earlier, man, she made those famous blueberry pancakes for me yesterday morning.
That
Can't
sounds
get better than
great.
that. It was so good. Well, last time we were together, Don, and it's been a minute, but we were working on the case of the missing glossary.
Right.
You know,
So my wife has a book that she's writing, a glossary of terms for the famous mystery writer Agatha Christie. And when you think about all those strange English terms that us Americans don't know, she's putting those all in a format that is quick for us to read. Now she's making a book out of it, but we thought it'd be a great idea to put and build a website out of it. And that way it's easier for people if they prefer to go to a website or on their phone and look up something quickly. And then, of course, as new terms come out, and they may own the book, but she can keep them up to date. So we've got this great idea of putting those terms out there. And so far, we've done, you have helped me with using the Too Sexy modules to be able to take that information, put it into a form on the website, and so the page that we have looks pretty cool. But what we decided was we're going to just give each person, each term, a quick little something, because that's what most of the terms are, just a quick little something. But there are terms that need a lot more explanation, and so we need like a detail page. So that's kind of where we're at with our process here.
yeah, so we've done 3 episodes so far, and I think through those 3 fairly short episodes, we've been able to get all this set up to where we've got a view for the data that's built in the behind the scenes, the content types for these glossary terms, and we've associated books to those glossaries. So those are separate entities that could be one or more books that that term's associated with. And I think the last time we were focused on getting that hooked in, as well as paving the way for what we'll be talking about today, which
Exactly.
is if there is a long description, and I'll edit this one here. Notice it has a read more button here. If it has a long description associated with it, then it will display. Well, I clicked it, Don. I promise I did. Okay, there we go. Let's click it again. Okay. The demo gods are not smiling on us today. I probably let it go to sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
There we
We
go.
know it
All right,
works.
now
We've
we're
seen
good.
it.
So we've got a short description which does display in the list view of all these glossary terms, but if there's a long description, then we hide or show a read more button there. And the idea is that when the user clicks on the read more button, they would get to a detail view that would show all the fields associated with that particular term. So that's what we're going to be working on today.
Yeah.
All right. So what I've done is I won't go over how we got here, in too much detail, other than I've already opened up the view that we were working on here, that has the list already configured here. And what we want to do is, Don, I got a little surprise for you.
Oh,
You
okay.
know, we had talked about before how like that would go to a separate page. If I flip back over here to the read more link, notice the URL at the bottom left there is going to glossary by word / by word detail. So we had set up a by word detail page, and we were passing the ID of the glossary term in the UR query string. So instead of doing that, we're going to get fancy, and we're going to actually put the detail on the same page. So we're going to use the same view to render the list as well as the detail.
Wow. All right. Looking forward to seeing that.
All right. We're going to do magic. Okay. So first what we want to do is we want to clean up this code just a little bit. My dog is going crazy here. He wants some of my hummus that I have sitting over on the desk. So if you guys see my dog back here, it's Clopper is his name. So I'll try to do a live stream one day with just me and him. We'll see how that goes. So what I want to do is I want to kind of set up some variables. So like, for instance, here we've got it kind of verbose here on the as list data default. So I want to set that up as a variable so we can kind of clean up these and use more meaningful variable names in here. So first, we're going to let this all still be wrapped in a div, but let's make a razor section here. And that just allows us to do razor syntax inside of those braces there. So I'm going to set up a var for, let's call it glossary terms. So this will be for this as list data default. And that's going to give us our, now we can just reference that by the variable name. So hopefully that makes sense. And then I want to set up a variable that reads a query string value. Remember in the down here where we're sending the ID in the query string parameter, I want to set up a variable that reads that query string parameter. So let's call this URL ID. And we're going to use a little bit of razor syntax here to do request dot query string, and then we'll put in brackets here. We'll put ID because that is the query string parameter that we want to read from the query string. So that means when the page loads, it's going to look for that, the existence of that, and if it has ID there and some value after it, it'll put that value into that variable called URL ID. With me so far?
Yes, indeed. I follow you exactly.
All right, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up an integer called ID, and you'll see how we'll use this in the next line. So I'm going to set up one more variable here, and we're going to call it ShowDetail. And here, what I want to do is I want to look and see if URLD has something in it, see if it has an integer value, and if it does, I'm going to write that value to ID. And this allows us, this is a little bit of a trick to kind of keep track of the state of the page. So whether or not we're looking at the list or we're looking at the detail. And this will all kind of get pieced together here in a bit.
Sure.
So I'm going to go int32. I'm going to try to parse the value that is in the ID field, the query string parameter. I'm going to try to parse it as a 32-bit integer. So let's see, URL ID, and then I'll write it out to ID. Now I know this is a lot of code or whatever, but this is really the toughest part of the code portion of this. And this is just going to help clean things up a little bit. So now that we've got glossary terms up here, I can copy that into my clipboard. Excuse me. And I'm going to replace this with glossary terms. Sure. And then I'll change CONT. I'm just going to say this is glossary term. Okay, so singular term in the list of terms. And I need to find all places where I reference CONT, which was an abbreviation for content before. and I'm going to replace it with glossary term. Is that
Exactly.
making sense?
Uh-huh.
All right. Let me know if I miss one here. I'm going to try to find them all here. There's one there, and I think there's one there, and one there. All right. So let's just...
And there's one more in the for each, line 16.
Line 16. Yep. You are right. All right. Now, I'm going to save this, and I could either do that by clicking the check down here or just doing Control S. I'm going to do Control S. And what we want to do is just make sure we didn't break things right there. If we did everything right, it should look exactly the way that it does now. So I'm going to refresh the page here, and we have messed up something here. So let's see what we messed up here. Let's see. Does not contain a definition for query string. Okay, I think I got a casing problem there. I think I need to capitalize the S in string. All right. So let's refresh. And we're looking the same here. Yep, looks good. So I think we're good. That means all of our data is still wired up. We just kind of cleaned up our code a bit to make the variable names make more sense, right?
Sure.
Okay, so what I want to do here now is we're going to have an if statement that's going to say in the detail, then we're going to show one section of code. And if ShowDetail is false, then it's going to show the other snippet of code.
Okay.
So we're going to use a little bit of reverse logic here. I'm going to do a razor syntax here for an if statement. If, and then let me open up the parens. We're going to say not ShowDetail. And the only reason I'm using not here is just simply because this is our list code here, right? I'm going to indent that just to make this look a little bit better. I'm just using not so that we can let this remain here at the beginning of it. So we'll open up with a brace. That's the beginning of our if statement. And then we'll close that if statement right here. Is that making sense? So if not ShowDetail, so that means we want to show the list, then we do the same thing that we've been doing, right?
Right.
Which is right here. Else, and then we open brace and close brace. Here we're going to, and I'm just going to put it in here as like a comment for right now, but we'll just show detail, right?
Got it.
All right. So while we're at it, let's see. I'm just looking at my notes over here because I've got some stuff already kind of figured out here. One thing that I want to do is show a bit of a trick within Too Sexy here that notice I did this kind of old school. I put in the href for the read more link. I put in here question mark, the query string parameter, name equals, and then the value. Well, we could easily do something like /id, and instead of an equals, put /, and that would put the value in there. And that works in DNN because of the way that query string parameters can be passed like that. The rewriter handles that. So that's one thing that we could do to make it a little bit more modern, I suppose. But another thing we could do is instead of having to type all of this out here, I'm going to get rid of it for now because we're going to really bring it back to itself. We're going to link it to the same page, but we're going to pass in the query string parameter of ID here. So there is a way in Razor to do link to, and then you can pass parameters. Oops, if I spell it right. And we're going to pass ID as the parameter, but we're going to concatenate the text that this is pure string value here, and then we're going to do plus whatever value there is. But now since we're already in Razor here, we don't have to do the @ symbol again. So we'll just do glossary term with that, and then we'll close the parens, and then notice I'm using single quotes around this. The reason I'm doing that is so that I can use double quotes inside without having to do some trickery here. There are multiple ways to do that, but this is kind of the way that I kind of like doing it. But what this is a function that's going to send it to itself, but it's going to append the query string parameter of ID and the value to the end of the URL. Okay. So let's just go ahead and save this and make sure we haven't broken something with that, because that's the little bit of a tricky part there. So let's see if our new URL format is working. Okay, I did something wrong here. Let's see, unexpected. Oh yeah, okay. So here we're in the first level under the razor, so we don't have to have the @ symbol for the for each anymore. And the way that works is, just if you're not familiar with Razor, it can get a little bit confusing sometimes. And this is kind of like, we wrapped this and said, okay, everything at the first level here is going, unless there's a nested statement inside of here, you don't have to use the @ symbol in front of any kind of logic. Same thing is true for here, but notice we had to use it here because this is nested deeper in the document object model, DOM, right? So that's why sometimes you have to use the @ symbol and sometimes you don't. So what I usually do is I use it, and then if it complains to me, I follow the directions, and remove it. So let me save that, and we will refresh this page. Okay, now we're looking good again. So we want to check that link to and make sure that it's working properly now. So if I hover over a read more, look at how it's the same page, but it's just passing the ID and the value in the new kind of / format there. So that is looking good. We're on the right track here. But we haven't told it what to render if we were to pass that query string parameter, like reload the page with an ID.
Exactly.
So it's going to be very similar to what we already have here, right? So let's just copy this entire thing. We're going to change it just a little bit, but I'm going to copy that into my clipboard, and I'm going to paste that into here.
Okay.
All right. Now notice I did not copy the for each statement. Any guesses why I didn't do that?
Because you don't have to loop through all of the rows of terms. You have to go straight to the one term that we're trying to do the detail on.
Exactly. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to set up a new variable. I'm going to call this one glossary term. All right. Now we have glossary term up here, but notice we're in a different area. So variables are localized to that particular code block, if you will.
Oh, I see.
So we can set up a new variable called glossary term, and it won't mix up with this one here. So don't get a little bit confused. We could call this foo if we wanted to,
I understand.
But just going to make a little bit more human readable sense here.
Got it.
Now this time what we want to do is we want to leverage glossary terms, which is our variable that we set up here. That's the whole list, right?
Exactly.
So we want to leverage that, but we want to get the first record in that list, but we're going to use a link statement here now this could be anything. This is just a letter, but I'm going to use T for term, and this is a T, and then it's a arrow function. This is link syntax, LINQ, for those who are not familiar with it. But this is something that's not specific to Too Sexy. This is a .NET thing to help us to query. Think of, you're a database guy, Don. So like you want to do a where statement, or where a particular data column equals a certain value, right? This is kind of like link is a link to SQL. So it's like a way to, in C# code here, in Razor in this case, where we could actually do kind of a SQL type statement here. So I'm going to do T entity ID equals ID. All right, so what this does is this is read this kind of like SQL. It's like where the entity ID, which is what we're passing in here, by the way, right? Where that value equals ID, which is read from the query string up here.
Should that be URL ID?
Good question. So URL ID is requesting that query string value, but here what we're doing is saying, I'm going to try to parse the value of URL ID to an integer. And if that works, then I'm going to write the ID out. So if, for instance, if somebody put in the query string up here, slash ID equals as if, or something like that, that wouldn't break the code. So this is a bit of defensive coding technique here of trying to parse it into an integer, because we're expecting an integer value for the ID, right? So, so here it's really ID. So we want to check ID instead of URL ID. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So there was an initial procedure of looking at the query string, parsing it, determining if there's a value. If there is, saving it in the variable ID, and setting a Boolean for ShowDetail. All of that is in your one variable declaration statement.
That's right. Yep.
Fantastic.
A little bit of a shorthand way of doing it, but we could have done exactly what you were saying there to get to that point, but just in a little more verbose way.
A nice economy of coding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you pick up these little tricks of the trade along the way, right?
Right, exactly.
So in this code block, really the only difference here that we want to display when we're looking at a detail is we don't want to check for if it has a long description, because, well, we're not even going to get to this page if it didn't have a long description, because the logic up here checked to see if it had a long description. So all we would really need to do here is let's just do another paragraph, and we'll put glossary term dot long description in here. And I'm going to come back in just a minute, but I'm going to get rid of this because we don't need that anymore, right?
Right.
Now, if you remember when we were setting up the content type for glossary term, we set up this field of long description, but it was different than short description. Short description was a simple string with an input field, just a text box input field, whereas long description had rich text, right? So that means that the value of this is going to be raw HTML, right? So we have to do something that Razor is going to help us out with here on this one. And I'm going to just use HTML.raw. And then I'm going to wrap this in that function. So what this does is it says, I'm going to render whatever value I put into here as raw HTML, but I'm going to encode it for display on the page so that we don't see, for this here, we won't see ampersand G or LT semicolon. We'll actually see an arrow, or actually we won't see it at all because it's HTML. It'll just treat it as a paragraph. Okay, hopefully that makes sense.
Right. But I do have one quick question. Isn't it, we already have it as HTML in the field, then the paragraph mark and whatever else might be in that field would already be in the rich text field itself, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it will be, but it's in as raw HTML. So we have to tell Razor to encode that.
Okay.
I tell you what, let's look at it without it. Because, this is easier understood to see.
I get the raw HTML part, but my understanding of the raw HTML is it's going to put in the content of the law and description. And if that starts with a paragraph, doesn't the content start with a p tag?
Yeah, but it'll render that as actual text. Yeah, it'll render literally the text. It'll be literal content.
Right,
so,
and doesn't that content start with a p tag? So wouldn't it be p tag then?
Yeah, here, let's just look at it. So I saved that. Let's just refresh the page and let's look at see what it looks like. And then that way we can also check to make sure our routing and all that's going to work. So let's click this guy. The URL looks good in the bottom left of the screen. So it should render the detail, and there it goes. See, you actually see the HTML content for long description.
Got it.
Because it's just a string. We're not telling it that it is HTML that it needs to render as such. So that's why that's doing that. Yep. So now if we just tell it that this is raw HTML that we're trying to display, then it will encode it properly and display it. So I'm going to save that real quick. And we'll refresh this page, and that should look perfect now.
All right. Holy moly.
Isn't that great? So
yes, it is. That's wonderful.
So let's go back to the list. Oh, wait, Don, we don't have a way of getting back to the list from here. So we just created a UX problem, right? We have a bad user experience. So I'm just going to click on the page for right now so we can get back to it. But let's just double check and make sure that was indeed bell handle information that we were seeing. Let's click on the Browning one, make sure that that is indeed it. Yep, it looks like it to me. So we're looking good. So let's fix our user experience problem here by giving a way for the user to get back to the list easily. Because we're really on the same page and we're just saying, hey, if it's a list, you know, if we don't have anything in ID, let's render this. Otherwise, render this guy, right? Exactly. So let's do something. I'm thinking we just put a little link, you know, down at the bottom of this area. Oh, I'm sorry, not the image. Let's go back up just a little bit to here, right below the long description that is going to render a link to get us back there. So I'm thinking let's put us a nice little horizontal row in there to separate it, because notice we've got, let's see, I think there was another horizontal row in here somewhere.
Right down below.
Oh, I forgot to put it in here. I was going to separate the short description. That way it kind of distinguishes the long description a bit. Here, we'll just take a look at that real quick. And I'll refresh here. And we'll go to a page. Yeah, so it gives it a little bit of separation there. Little subtle, you know, difference there. And you may want to do something else with that later on. But let's see, right below this, let's put that hyperlink. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, I'll tell you what, we'll do it without it first, and we'll take a look at it, and we'll talk about what we need to do from there. So let's do href. And then here we want to just send it to itself. So Glossary, I think is the name of the page, /by-word. And then we want to do something like, I don't know, let's just put 2 left-hand arrows here together. And I'm using HTML. You know, I really want it to render arrows instead of, you know, interpreting those as arrows. So if I put, you know, left arrows like that, it wouldn't show up properly. So just do it like this, and then we'll do something like back to list. And let's take a look at that and see.
See what that looks like, sure.
Yep. And it's gonna be a bit of a problem, and we'll see what that shows in just a minute. But what I notice I was over here on the right hand side of it to click the read more button. Well, if I'm scrolling down, I kind of don't like it over here. So I was kind of putting on the UX hat here. I think this probably needs to be over to the right. So we can easily fix that by putting a bootstrap class on this, and this is pull-right. And that will align it to the right hand side. So let me just refresh the detail view. Yeah, so here we're looking at the list, we click a button, right? And we're already over here, so I didn't have to move the cursor too much.
Got it.
So I think
Okay.
that works, and you may want to pretty that up a bit, as we go forward. But that's nice and clean. So if we
Exactly.
were to render something, let's just put something in this one because we've got an image here. All right.
Good. Yeah. Let's see what that looks
Let's
like.
just put some random stuff in here, and you'll want to fix that
Of course.
at some point. Let's save that. So now it should render a read more button for us, which it does. So
Yeah.
we go to read more, and yeah, so the image is showing up good for over here too, and that's really why I wanted to test it out because this was the only one that had the image with it.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yeah. So I mean, there you go. We've got it, working the way, it's really nice experience here. You'll probably want to aesthetically, clean some of this stuff up and all that when you get to that
Yeah.
point. But like that one thing that we had talked about. So if we were to put something that's non-integer format there, it wouldn't break it. It would just render the list. Does
That
that
makes
make?
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
That's nice
back
to
to
have
that.
that ability.
Yep. So
Try
this
hard.
function here actually returns a Boolean value. So
Right.
try parse. So it says if URL ID is an integer, then write out the ID to ID and make show detail true. So if this doesn't, if URL ID is not an integer, then show detail becomes false and ID is nothing.
Yeah. See, that's wonderful. Very easy.
Yeah, I
Ah,
figured I would throw this one in there because, this is a nice way to do it on a single page and you don't have the extra overhead of the multiple pages here. So,
exactly. Exactly. I like it.
well, that's pretty good, man.
Slick.
I'm
Yeah,
excited.
that's slick. Oh, she's going to be very happy with being able to see all these terms in here and then seeing the switching it over to the details. So now it's really a matter of filling it all out with her terminology. And of course, we'll probably dress some things up, like you said, but the, uh, the actual plumbing that we were missing is now all here.
And this is, I know in one of our talks, it was a bit, I don't know, alarming, surprising maybe that we had so much, code kind of stuff to deal with. But, just to kind of, I think we're kind of wrapping this up, just to recap, some of this extra code, I mentioned this a while back, you're going to utilize these types of patterns over and over again, looping through a list of content items, right? Or referencing a field value of a particular one. You're going to get used to some of these code patterns. So even if you're not a C# developer, a Razor developer, Too Sexy developer, or whatever, it's a lot of this is doable for the average person. It's not too bad once you get over the hump of learning some of these code snippets, if you will. And
Oh, sure.
yeah, so I kind of wanted to cap it off by mentioning that because I don't want that to be the discouraging thing. And the idea here and the benefit from all this is you code once and then use the system forever, right? So it's more about doing what's needed to be done in order for the person that is editing the actual content to have a great experience.
Very true.
Yeah.
And it's a lot like going to a foreign land, not knowing the language, but having somebody to come along with you. And when you're at a point where you say, I want to go to this place or I want to order this thing, having the person there that knows the language and says, oh, that is this word. You know how to speak, you know how to talk to people, you just don't know the particular, some specific terms. That's very much what Razor is to me. I understand the from numerous other programming languages, some so obscure and obsolete that no one talks about them anymore. I know the structure and the functions, but I don't know the functions that are provided in a more modern tool like Razor. And that's the piece that was missing for me. So this really, as Agatha Christie would say, the butler did it, or the case has been solved.
That's great, man. Well, I mean, that's a great segue to the end here. Thanks for joining
Exactly.
me and Don on this great adventure of entry into the foray of too sexy content management and structured content. So I hope it's been helpful to everybody. And Don, I sure hope you guys get a lot of use out of some of the things that have been learned here.
I'm sure that we will. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day. This is DNN Dave and the Don Gingold. Have a great one.